The gaming landscape was a different beast back in the late 1980s. The vast majority of games were focused on high scores, a test of a player's skill and endurance. Narrative games were a little harder to come by, and often a little harder to sell. With so many games targeted at younger people seeking high-octane, heart-pounding, adrenaline-secreting action such as Tetris, Donkey Kong, Miss Pac-Man, and Elite. Yes, the very same Elite as in Elite Dangerous. You can bet longer, slower, narrative-driven RPGs were seen as a bit of a risk, as the market for them was so fresh and untested. Final Fantasy is by no means the first major JRPG, but it sure was a part of the first wave. Dragon Quest in 1986, Final Fantasy, Phantasy Star, and Megami Tensei in 1987, all series you still hear about today launching their very first installments, back to back nearly 40 years ago. Incredible year for those wealthy enough to buy 4 games priced at about $166.
More money than you ever dreamed of.
I'm playing the Pixel Remaster version of the game. Seeing as it's more accessible for people like me, with modern gamer brain thanks to the reduced grinding, lower shop prices, etc. My apologies to any of the evangelists of the original who believe the grind is an integral part of the experience. Immediately you're greeted with what I would call an overwhelming choice. You're building your entire 4-person party right now. I initially went in and started with the default setup. The problem with that, I didn't hit record and missed the entire first session. So I did the only correct thing and started again entirely. This time with a different party composition, because it turns out mana doesn't exist, and spells work on expendable spell slots, much like Dungeons and Dragons. I also discovered during that play session that grinding for Gil for Phoenix Down is not actually the only way to revive a dearly departed party member. There is in fact an unmarked building in every town, a church, where you can revive a party member for next to nothing. Why on earth is such an important building unmarked on the map? I have no idea. I can't even say that it's just a fixture of its time. They could have added this in any of the remakes. And so their quest began. As the 4 warriors of light, they felt overwhelmed by the great task destiny had placed before them. They did not even know the true significance of the 4 crystals they held in their hands. The crystals that once, long ago, held a light that shone so brightly. The time for their journey had come. The time to cast off the veil of darkness and bring the world once more into the light. Warrior of Light, crystals, is all very reminiscent of my extremely short stint in the Final Fantasy XIV MMO. And who are our Warriors of Light? The tanky warrior Roiko, the thief Ruckus, the pugilist monk Frankie, well, pugilist once I realise my grave error, but we'll get there, and a red mage called Hubert. Our globetrotting adventure begins in the little town of Cornelia, where the king strikes a deal with us. Save his daughter, the Princess Sarah, who's been abducted by Garland, a disgraced ex-knight, and thanks to the kingdom's failed attempts at rescuing her, we know exactly where they are. The Chaos Temple up north. We gear up, stock up, and head out. On the way, I run into my first relic of a bygone era, design-wise. Status effects cannot be healed by resting. No amount of sleeping in a field tent, sleeping bag, or even an inn can cure you of poison. Status effect healing can only be done by using buyable curatives, or a spell. Now from a design standpoint, I quite like this. In most games you can generally ignore curatives unless you're in a dire situation, because generally speaking, there's a full heal always just around the corner, Poke Centers, revive items, save points that full heal. But this encourages you to take a second and prepare for the journey ahead, and spend wisely to ensure your safety through what's coming. So we step foot into the Chaos Temple, and we're greeted by the largest number of enemies I have seen in a non-tactics, turn-based JRPG. Not only that, it was an ambush, so they each got a turn before I could retaliate. They wiped the party in 2 turns. After some trial and error, we make it through and initiate the fight with Garland. His sprite is extremely cool, but he gets packed up like the little bitch that he is. The princess is returned safely home, and the northern bridge is repaired. Now if you talk to the newly saved princess, she gives you a loot that is completely unimportant until the very end of the game. Venturing north over the newly repaired bridge, we find a little cave housing a mage called Matoya, and she's missing her crystal eye. She currently can't see, so being the brave heroes that we are, we decide to pilfer her chests completely. Heading east from there, there's a little village called Pravoka that currently has a little pirate problem. Luckily for us, there's a group of 4 of them just loitering around town. Maybe if we talk to them, they'll let slip where their hideout is and we can go take them down. Or they just undergo cellular mitosis and attack. And we beat them so badly that they decide, ultimately, the pirate life just isn't for them, and they hand over their entire ship. But who are we to look a gift horse in the mouth? One of the villagers mentions that the elves live to the south. I suppose that's where we'll be heading, with our hard-earned boat. Turns out the villager was correct, and south across an inland sea, we find the elven town of Elfheim, and it's full of very Link-looking elves. They let slip that their prince is in a dire spot of need. He's currently taking some eternal Z's, not as in dead, just perpetually asleep, and it's up to us to go and free him, of course. While aimlessly wandering the world for a cure, I found a cave that the game calls the Marsh Cave. And I have no idea if the game intends for me to be here at the moment. I suppose we'll know if I go in and get one shot or not. Turns out I one-shot them, so it isn't an issue. Minus the fact I had to leave to buy more antidotes because these weird green wolves kept poisoning me. The cave had some decent loot and a crown, which is presumably quite important. A nice little diversion, but back to the task at hand. Luckily, I spoke to the right villager who let me know that the Dark Elf King, Astos, is the cause of all of this. And it was at this point I start to realise that my monk Frankie hasn't had a new weapon in quite some time. Everybody else has had at least one weapon upgrade. I chalk it up to the game just poorly placing out weapon upgrades, but more on that later. Heading west, we find the Western Keep, a derelict place filled with bats and nothing much else. Inside we meet the King, and immediately, upon speaking to him, he lets us know that he's fooled us. Fooled us how, exactly? I'm not sure. I've only just seconds ago learned of his existence. Maybe I was supposed to meet him before finding the crown, and he would trick us into digging it out of the cave for him. Turns out he himself is Astos, and he's got hands. He raked me over the coals in seconds. Round 2, I decided to prioritise DPS over everything else, and we managed to take him out. Which gets us the eye the blind mage lady we robbed wanted. She gives up a bottle of Jolt tonic in return for her eye, but before letting me leave, she has to tell me that I'm not as attractive as she thought I would be. She's gifted with the coveted sense of sight, thanks to my hard work, and immediately insults me. Maybe she knew about the theft all along. Now, as you might have guessed, the Jolt tonic wakes up the prince, and he gives us the Mystic Key, an item capable of opening practically every door we haven't been able to thus far. So, it's time for a whirlwind tour around the world for some loot. During my exploration, I come across this shark sprite, which is equal parts weird and kind of amazing. Why does it have a back of the head? After the brief collectathon, we encounter some dwarves in their cave. One named Neric, who wants some nitro powder, one named Smith, who wants some adamantite to craft a magical sword, the blacksmith called Smith, some nominative determinism for you there, and while we're there we get a tip that the powder might be stored away in the castle. What castle? I have no idea. After some wandering around, it turns out it's Cornelia Castle. So we collect that, hand it to Neric, who uses the powder to cause an explosion so large it creates the Panama Canal. Now we can take our ship out to sea. Let's hope we don't get evergreened. Into the wide blue yonder, searching for new places so beautiful they must have been blessed by the gods themselves. Instead, we find Melmond.
I've just woke up in a fucking steaming mood, yeah? Because I live in a shithole! Do you know what I mean?
Melmond.
It's a fucking shithole!
The villagers there let me know this place wasn't always like this. These lands used to be fertile, and further south you go, the better the soil would be. Now,
It's a fucking shithole!
at least we know the problem seems to be emanating from the south. One upside to this town is that I've managed to find the solve to a problem I've had for a minute now. Getting back out of dungeons. Getting 4 layers deep just to encounter a status effect you have no healing for, or clearing a dungeon and facing the long walk back after using so many of your resources to get this far, leaves me with a longing for an item, or a spell, that takes you back to the start of the dungeon, escape rope style. Now I think Melmond has the solution. A level 5 spell that takes you to the previous floor. The previous floor of the dungeon? Yeah, it's pretty bad. I didn't take it. I'd have to use 4 level 5 spell slots just to get out of a dungeon. No thanks. Now, I'm 3 to 4 hours deep in a game that really is not very long, and I've yet to return the light to any crystals at all. And that was the one thing we set out to do. It's our only explicit goal. Strange that it hasn't happened so far. After finding the cave we need to progress, and working our way through it, we get some loot, and we meet a vampire, whose defeat gets us a star ruby. However, just beyond him is a stone slab on the floor, clearly something that is begging to be interacted with. Seemingly nothing we can do with it though. And I really don't want to take the arduous trip back only to discover that I need to come all the way back in because I missed something. So I asked Google, and it turns out there is actually nothing to do here right now. I gave the star ruby to the giant we found in the cave earlier, which leads to him walking extremely slowly through a wall and off screen. Whatever floats your boat, I guess. And upon meeting a sage in a cave, he gives us the earth rod, which we should use on the stone relief we found earlier by the vampire. Time to go all the way back. Fortunately, this leads us to an actual crystal. Praise be. The only negative is it's guarded by a lich. And he absolutely fucking wrecked me. Round 2, he put 3 of my 4 party members to sleep on turn 1, doomed from the start. And third time's the charm, as they say, right? Not for me. Surely the 4th has to be the one. This time, I've equipped a weapon I have that is specifically stronger against magic users. Lo and behold, it works wonders. But we did beat him with a little bit of luck. He only used 1 single target or multi-target offensive spell. I cannot survive 2. After clearing the dungeon, we set sail to the south, because I was trying to get there earlier but failed. Down there we found the quaint little town of Crescent Lake. The villagers aren't particularly talkative, they didn't give me any hints on what I should be doing. Wandering through the town, I found a circle of 12 sages in the woods by the village, and they told me that there are 5 dastardly fiends, each guarding a crystal that we need to liberate. We've already taken out one of them, the Lich, so now it's time to find the rest. I wandered aimlessly, for frankly an embarrassing amount of time, Clueless as to where I'm supposed to be, where I'm supposed to be going, no choice but to consult a guide. Turns out, I was supposed to talk to all 12 of the sages. And I'm not kidding, I only spoke to 10. Anyway, they gave me a canoe that we can use to traverse the rivers. So I did what was only natural and travelled directly up the first river I come across. It leads straight to a volcano. Definitely the home of a fiend if ever I saw one. While I'm not sure if I have everything that I need to do some spelunking in a volcano, that's never stopped me before. In we go. As one might expect, the floor of the volcano is lava, and it does damage to you as you walk over it. I have no idea if there's an item I'm supposed to find somewhere else that makes me either immune or highly resistant, but in all actuality, the lava isn't nearly as dangerous as you might expect. Doesn't seem like much of an issue when you have 40 something high potions to chug. Well, we've made it 3 floors down and I've used about half of my high potions. My overconfidence might be the end of me. However, what's more frightening than my potion count is this enemy right here. The Pyrolisk. This had me scared because in an earlier dungeon I encountered an enemy with the same sprite in a different colour, and that enemy could petrify. And I don't have enough golden needles to deal with it. Unfortunately, these guys are even worse. They have a spell called Gaze that just flat out one-shots if it hits. At the end, we find the boss called Marilith, a sort of flame naga type enemy, and she goes down without a hitch. Fairly comfy fight where it always feels like you're close to failing, but just a touch of dedicated healing gets you through it. A very quintessential JRPG fight. And with that, the light is returned to a second crystal, meaning we're now halfway to achieving our goal. It's at this point in the game that a certain irritation point becomes a little more pronounced for me. The frequency of random encounters while travelling the overworld. This only feels like an issue because of how often you're left to wander the overworld with little to no direction. So during a period like this, where you're liable to get very lost while looking for where you need to be, the incessant random encounters become very grating. It makes me wish there was an item like a repel from Pokemon. At least in the Pixel remasters, you can press one button and it will automatically repeat wherever your last battle inputs were. After some blind wandering around, we sail northeast and find a dock, walk a little inland and find an estuary that leads up into the mountains. This is the Cavern of Ice. It's actually pretty rough for a dungeon. There are dark wizards in there that cast AoE spells routinely that do over 100 damage to everyone. If you're unlucky enough to fight a couple at once, they could wipe your entire team before you get a chance to do a single thing. Within the Cavern of Ice, we find the Levystone. It was guarded by an evil eye, who I expected to be the boss of the area, until he died in one hit. Thinking back, there was a dwarf who was looking for some Levystone. Best ferry it back over to him. He doesn't give a shit. He's talking about wanting Levystone, but not taking mine off of me. And now I'm at a complete 100% loss on what to do. Time to check a guide. Now, I never would have guessed how to make use of this thing. You could correctly divine that it's going to be used to make the classic Final Fantasy staple, the airship. But how? Turns out there's a tiny little desert area below Crescent Lake, insanely easily missed. In fact, I wound up there earlier in the game when I was lost again, and there wasn't anything to see. Nothing on the overworld, nothing indicating that there's a secret, nothing. Now it nets you the power of flight. It's an amazing way of getting around, although it did take me a second to learn that you can't land it anywhere, it has to be on open grassland. Flying the ship to the northeast side of the map, we find a place called Gaia in the mountains. The shops here have some decent armour, but still no weapons for the monk. I did see, while looking in the guide for what to do with the Levystone, that class promotions are currently available to me, and I need 50,000 gil in order to unlock the next piece of story progression, so I best not spend too much. The Citadel of Trials lies to the west. It's a lot like the rocket hideout in Pokemon Fire Red or Leaf Green. The floors are littered with a series of teleporters. Pick the wrong one and get sent backwards. Overall, it isn't too bad to navigate, but the reward for clearing it is just a rat's tail. I'm just hoping that this was worth my time. A little further south, you find Bahamut himself, the king of the dragons, in an extremely cool room adorned with swords on either side. And thanks to our courage in completing the Citadel of Trials, he sees us as fitting recipients for his enhancements. He turns Roiko into a knight, Frankie into a master, Ruckus into a ninja, and Hubert into a red wizard. The most surprising thing about these upgrades were the fact it gave Roiko and Frankie these weird, inverted triangle, buff, bulging, sexy bodies. I wasn't expecting them to come out of the process looking like Fist of the North Star characters, but I digress. Now, at this point, as is routine, I'm lost. I find myself in a desert with a tower that I can't enter. I one-shot a T-Rex while there though, and that felt kinda good. And there's a town called Lufenia, but I can't understand what the residents are saying. I consulted the guide, and with amazing reason, because it turns out the desert caravan where I'm supposed to be is entirely fucking invisible on the overworld, and in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't look like anything of note whatsoever. I bought a fairy in a bottle there, and left as mad as you would imagine. Now the people of Onrek told me I need to find the Rosetta Stone to communicate with the Sky People, and that secondly, there's a lady in town who's building a submarine out of a barrel to get to some underwater treasure. She won't go down there herself, saying that she can't hold her breath for long enough. At least that gives us a couple of things on the to-do list. The fairy thread of this is solved by returning her to Gaia. When speaking to her by the lake, she gifts you with the Ox Ale. This allows us to breathe underwater. I stocked up on supplies pretty heavily this time around. I don't intend on getting caught with my pants down in this dungeon. My over-preparation was not warranted, as the Water Temple Shrine was very easy. Except for maybe one floor that housed a majority of the dungeon's treasure. Some of the chests in there seemed impossible to get to, and I just couldn't work it out. Turns out, this is the only place outside of the overworld with a wrap-around screen. If you walk out of the right side, you will find yourself on the left side, original Super Mario Bros. Style. But that is where we find the Rosetta Stone. The guy who wanted the stone is found in Melmond, and he teaches the whole party the language of the Sky People in a couple of seconds. Very effective teacher. The first Lufenian I spoke to in the village tells me that the airship I use was built by one of their ancestors, the one and only Sid. And another villager hands me a chime that seemingly gives me access to the Mirage Tower we found in the desert, which coincidentally has the same name as the tower you find in the desert in Pokemon Emerald. Seems the Pokemon franchise has paid homage to Final Fantasy a couple of times at least. The tower itself is fairly easy. It's only 3 floors, but at the top you find a warp cube, and that takes you even higher into a flying fortress above the clouds. The most important things you'll find up there are adamantite, better remember to take that back to the dwarves, a couple hideous sprites for the Rakshasa and the Were-Tiger, and Tiamat, the Fiend of the Wind. Now, I won't lie, Tiamat took me down a couple times, but getting Saber cast on my warrior and ninja while exclusively healing with my monk and red mage worked great. A battle of attrition. And with that, the light is returned to the final crystal, and now we have the power to banish all of the darkness plaguing the lands. But first we have to see what those dwarves can do with some adamantite. and they use it to forge Excalibur for us. Now, in the mythological sword hierarchy that I've made up, Excalibur's pretty high up there, so this is probably the best or one of the best weapons in the game. Now it feels like we're really closing in on the end. Now again, I'm a little bit lost, so I start checking the guide to see what I'm actually supposed to be doing. Turns out that is return to the Chaos Temple from the very start of the game and travel back in time 2,000 years. Don't know how I missed that was something I was supposed to do, but here we are. Now this is fairly confusing as far as dungeons go in this game. Plenty of blocked off areas you're intended to circle back to once you're a bit further in. But we finally get to use the loot that we got at the very start of the game for saving the princess from Garland. And it plays a classic Final Fantasy motif we've all heard a million times before. Unfortunately, this brings us up against the Lich Fiend once again, and he uses Warp, which instantly killed my two heavy hitters. And here I thought the Protect armor they had on stopped them from being insta-killed. On the second attempt I used a spell called Null Death on everyone. After a particularly rough DPS race he goes down. I suppose that's technically the third death for him now. Now while I was doing this I took extensive notes about this playthrough. And this is the moment I realised my biggest mistake yet. So I'm just going to read the next few paragraphs of notes, word for word.
Don't even know what the monk is here for anymore. Not had a weapon since the second city. Just got iron nunchucks while everybody else has Excalibur and Worm Killers and Sun Renders and Soul Splitters or whatever. The guy's dead weight. He can't even one-shot plebs anymore. You know what? He's a monk. I'm taking his weapon off of him. He can make do. Asshole. Oh shit. His damage just went way up. He just hit over 1,000. This dungeon's done. I can't believe I've had the monk nerfed for so long. I fucking love picking monks in games. I was starting to feel like an idiot for having any faith in him. Turns out I'm the dumb one. Because I should have had more faith in him. He's the fucking GOAT. I'm gonna fucking cook this Kraken, mate. He's getting the business. Kraken done. No healing, no spells. Sit down.
Basically, because there were monk-specific weapons at the very start of the game, I was operating under the assumption that monks in Final Fantasy used martial weapons. Staves, quarter staves, nunchucks, fist weapons, etc. But no, these fuckers are way of the open hand. Anyway, this is where we get Masamune. Turns out there is another sword above Excalibur in the hierarchy I made up. Who knew? And now we're on the final boss of our little fiend boss rush, Tiamat. But because it was so fresh on my mind, it went down, no problem. And this takes us to the final boss, Garland. Again, I knew that this guy's sprite was too cool for him just to be a one-off. But with this being Final Fantasy, I wasn't expecting the final boss to just be a guy in a suit of armor. I was thinking more of a godlike being with 12 or so phases. Oh, he's transforming? Oh, he tore a hole in space-time and intends on fighting us in this galactic void space. Oh, he's called Chaos now, and has a tummy face and people knees. This is more what I expected. Now, I was beating my head against this brick wall for quite a while, because Chaos can hit with melee for over 800, higher than Frankie's max HP, and he can self-heal with Curaja for 9,999 HP, more than I can deal in a full turn. Now I kept trying with minor variations to my strategy for maybe about an hour before calling it quits. It really started to take a toll, but there's still one avenue open to me that these old JRPGs tend to expect of you, but I haven't done at all so far: grinding. Luckily, the Pixel remasters have a boost menu where you can alter the amount of XP and gil you gain in fights by up to 4 times. Unluckily, I had no idea that shit existed, so I did it the old-fashioned way. Time. Eventually, the party went from level 49 to 64. We must have a chance now, right? Well, the problem is I actually had a chance before doing all of the grinding, because I failed to notice one key thing. Saber, the damage boosting spell, can stack. Thanks to this revelation, I could hit 3 to 4k per turn, and it made the whole thing fairly trivial. And upon defeating Chaos, the game immediately ends, with some scrolling text that says, "The time loop was severed at last. The endless struggle that raged over 2,000 years has ended, and peace prevailed once more. The light of the 4 crystals restored the forces of wind, water, earth, and fire. It was a mere trick of fate that had given rise to the chain of Garland's wrath. But magnified by the 4 forces meant to guide our world, that trick of fate also gave birth to the fiends. Monsters had run rampant as the world sank into darkness. But all that is now past. The 4 forces flowing as they were meant, the warriors prepared to cross time and return to the world they knew. A world where Princess Sarah, Queen Jane, and even Garland himself await. When was this fateful day that stopped time spiraling into a loop? None can say. It seemed the cycle into which the world had fallen would last forever, but the bravery of 4 young travellers changed that. They took the forces that filled the world with darkness and used them to bathe the world in light. None will ever recall the struggle the 4 endured, for the breaking of the chain means that it never existed. But within the tales of fantasy that people tell, the memory of their deed lives on. Tales of dwarves and elves, of dragons and shining civilizations that reach for the heavens, even as they fell. And now, their return is upon us. With the memory of their struggle buried deep in their hearts, they will quietly watch over our world. Remember always that the forces of the world must be used as they were intended. That the power of light must never be used for dark. And that the true crystal resides in your heart. For you are the warrior who crossed time. You are the bringer of light. And that is a wrap on Final Fantasy I. It's short on story and surprising on combat depth for the time, ultimately leading back to a fairly basic experience that I have to admit was immensely refreshing. I imagine it's like drinking water after a long period of having a bad diet and drinking exclusively high fructose corn syrup and alcohol. It's stripped back, it's basic, it's a nourishing reset. And as such, it earns itself a comfortable D ranking. This is subject to change, of course. Next up, Final Fantasy II.